We have talked about the startup calculus, three parts: user model, value model, business model. We have talked about the first two, which is how to define the user model and how to define the value model. Now comes the third part, this second half of those two, which is how do you validate them. First, today we'll talk about how do you validate the user model, and next time we'll talk about how do we validate the value model, right? So that's roughly halfway through. By end of next session, we'll be halfway through the course or whatever, class structure, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. So just a quick recap. This is what we did long back. We looked at the activity matrix and how that can be used to define user model in a quantitative manner, right? And a quantitative manner, to do that, basically what you have to do is you have to look at the inputs and outputs from a user's perspective. So what do users give into a product, or what are they willing to invest to use a product, and what do they expect out of, what benefits they expect out of the product, right? So that's a user model. And what we discussed was that depending on whether the product is a business product or consumer product, you will have different inputs and outputs. For business products, the input is how much money the customers or your customers have invested into solving the problem, that particular specific activity that you want to use as an unbundling activity. So that's on the x-axis. So it could be less or more, right? So there's a spectrum there. And on the y-axis is what do they expect out of it, which is for businesses, typically what they expect is either they want to get the revenues to go up or they want the cost to go down, right? So that's on the y-axis. The most important thing from when you build a company or a startup is that if you can help your customers to increase their revenue, then you are actually directly helping them to justify the value you're adding. Right? So that's your direct ROI. When the relationship between what you do and what outcome you deliver can be easily correlated, that's direct ROI. Indirect is if there's some indirection in that, and of course on the bottom is the cost side, right? So there's no correlation, but you're helping reduce the cost. We looked at 1090 as an example, and we said that, actually the previous slide also had the 1090 example, but we looked at that and we said, this is how a company, for example 1090, went about and did that. The next step after that is to look at the market size. So once we have all the use cases that you can identify for the product that for the innovation that you have, there are different applications. Those are different use cases. Once you identify all of them, you have to go back and say how large is the market size for each of those, right? So that's the bottom-up calculation. And we said the way to do that is look at the number of customers, number of users, into the bundling activity. How many times would they use the product that you have, and the revenue per activity, which is how much would they be willing to pay per activity, right? Once you do that, okay, this is the same thing, so yeah. But once you do that, what happens is you're able to then figure out, is there an activity which is above that threshold, right? Or many activities could be above that threshold, and typically you want to pick the activity on the top right corner, right? So that's basically what gets you to define the user model, right? So that's basic. And what we discussed last time was that one activity, in this case, for 1090, the retailer to customer part of the journey, where they deliver frozen food, that one activity need not be $1 billion more market size. Aggregate should be more than $1 billion, but one activity can be less than that, right? So then the question becomes, why should we validate the user model? Because whatever we did here so far is based on user research. So you have already gone out and spoken to customers. You have actually collected or you actually have observed how your customers are using, are doing their day-to-day activities. And in that context, you have observed the pain points. So you have talked to them and you have observed them. So you have actually a reasonable sense of what the issues are, right? So therefore, and of course, you have done the bottom-up market size calculation. So you also validated that, because unlike top-down, where you're relying on analyst reports to estimate the market size, in the bottom-up, you have actually gone about and understood the market structure and said, okay, these are the customers, this is how much they're willing to pay because they're already paying so much for other products, similar products or inferior products in the market. So therefore, these numbers are if you do a bottom-up calculation, are a little more trustworthy, right? So therefore, the question becomes, so why should you do user model validation at all? Why should you not just jump in and start building the product? Because now you've done all the hard work, right? So I think that's what I want to talk about today and discuss how you should do the validation, right? So first, let's look at, what actually, so this is again repeat. So the three things we have already done, actually is market research. So you've gone and understood what the market structure is and where are the profit pools and revenue pools. You have understood who the users are and what the problems are. And you have also done the competitor analysis. Competitor analysis is very important because that's the one which helps you to say this is how or why my product is better than anything else that's out there in the market, right? So then question is, why not build the MVP? I think most people would have heard of this term called MVP, which is minimum viable product, right? And the question is, okay, why not? Why don't we jump in? And the answer is, first, we need to go back and objectively validate, right? See, the whole thought process in this, these series of sessions, what we're doing is we are trying to be more thorough and methodical about how do you do startups, right? Which is why the startup calculus, right? You're doing a little more systematic way of doing it. So the objective validation is very important, right? And why do we need to do this objective validation? Reason for this is a concept called say-do gap. So what people say is not always what they do, right? A simple example would be if you ask someone, do you exercise every day? Rather, let's take a step back. Let's say you're building a product which is a good exercise machine, right? And you want to do a user research and you go to market, you go to potential customers, let's say college students or just after college, first job kind of people, and you ask them, would you want to exercise? I'm thinking of building a good machine, or let's say a treadmill, or I think Peloton-like machine, which has a social feature and you can, instructor or trainer will be advising you. And you ask people, would you want to do exercise? And I think almost everyone would say yes. Right. The reason for this is because they want to, there is a perception. They want to create a perception that they are achieving the objectives that they set for themselves. Right. And that's what basically we need to guard ourselves against. Right. So they might, in this simple example, if you look from this side, there are 4 things, but if you look from this side, there are 3 things. I mean, this is just a simple optical thing, but these are simple things where people can get tripped, right? So what we need to do is to actually, and this is actually something that has been observed for years, for that it is, something what people tell you and what they do is not always the same, right? So that's why basically you have to actually observe what they do and not what they tell you, right? So how do we do this, right? And to do this, basically, you have to go back and collect quantitative data, right? And to make sure that you don't invest too much time and energy in building that product, you have to first come up with an early version of the product, right? So let's look at how people have done that. And I'll use, I think, 1 example or 2 examples from the software world, then I'll give you a few examples from deep tech world.
Yeah. So, as you said that early model,
yes.
It should be just a working model you're talking about.
So it might even be something which is before early model, right? So here's an example, Dropbox. I think most people know what Dropbox is, right? So when Dropbox started, they basically said they need to figure out, actually when Dropbox started, there were many, even before any of these Dropbox-like companies came into place, there was FTP, right? You could always do file transfer, right, between two servers or 2 computers, right? And the techies were fairly happy with it, right? You could FTP easily. Then came the time where, this need to transfer files between 2 different devices became little more, I guess, widespread, and non-techies started doing it. So at that time, few startups got started. Right? And at that time, the big challenge was that if you had a Windows machine and someone else had a Mac OS machine, it was actually difficult to transfer files between two different things. Right? The problem became even worse once the smartphones came into picture, right? Because now smartphones also have, let's say, your photos, and you want to sync it with the, with the cloud. It became difficult, right? So this was the context in which Dropbox came out. Many products existed in market, right? And they said, I think I'm not going to ask you this question because I think most people know this, but the users for them were the people who are already familiar with file transfer. Right? So it was not the people who are not yet doing file transfer. It was actually people who were already doing the file transfer. Right? So that's the early customer that they had. Right? So you don't have to basically always, the early customer should be someone to whom you don't have to explain why the product is needed. Right? So they should already be feeling the need or the pain of the use case that you want to solve. The value model in this case was performance-led strategy. Right? So what Dropbox said was, irrespective of which OS you are on, the file transfer should work transparently. Right? Which in the backend means they just need to build adapters. Right? So if I pick up a file from a Linux system and I want to move it to a Windows system, the software layer should take care of interfacing and pulling it and pushing it. So users should not be aware of that. So that's what they did. So this was a performance strategy. Performance in the sense, irrespective of where you're coming from, where you're going, it should work. Right? And it should work fast. So those are the performance elements of it. Right? So the first customers, even before they built the product, they said, we think it's a great idea. Right? And looking back now, we all agree that's a great idea. But when you're starting something new, things are not that black and white. Right? So at that point, they said, okay, is it actually going to work or not? So what they did was they went to Dig, and I think people would know about Dig, right? Earlier avatar of Reddit, but more on the news side of it. So people go there for sharing tech and science news. And they basically what they did was they created a 3-minute product video. Right? So they just created a video saying, here's how it will work. If we were to build it, this is what it would do. Right? And they put it out there. Dig users were already in the habit of looking at news and analyzing the news and commenting on news and then sharing it with other people. Right? So that's why they chose that particular set of users. Right? So, and what they saw was that these users were very excited about the possibility of this kind of a product, right? Which can work transparently across devices, which is what gave them the confidence that actually there might be a real need in the market. Right? So this is an objective way of doing it. It's not really 100% objective. So the real objective thing is actually you build the product, right? Which is what they did next. So they actually said, okay, Dig users are good. They are already social. They're already at the cutting edge. But really what we want to do is we want to build a product, right? And for that, they went and built a product. I've called that MUP Plus, and I'll talk about why first is MUP and second is MUP Plus. But for this, they went after the early adopters, which were the tech-savvy employees in the Bay Area, right? So basically, the customer, all the people who already were, fairly familiar with technology, they were already doing FTP and other things. They were using other products, and then they went after them and saying, "Here's a product. Would you want to use it?" And once they got the adoption, they got conviction that this is the right product to build, and that's how they started thinking about how to go about, building this product in a full-fledged manner. So that's the real way of doing validation. It's a step after user research. You have to do user research. You cannot avoid user research. You must do user research. You have to observe users in their own context. Even after that, you have to do validation, an objective way of validating the problem that you want to solve. Right? So that's basically what it is. Does that answer your question? Yeah. All right. So then the question becomes, how do we do it, right? One, obviously, you have to identify the users who are willing to adopt new products, right? And the second part is that you have to look at this thing of, the smallest possible product that you can build, right? So that's basically what we need to do at this time. Again, the reason to pick the smallest unbundled product at this stage is to make sure that you don't spend too much time and energy in building the product. Because right now we don't yet know if the market is ready to adopt a new product or not, right? So that's where the phase is. So first do that. Now you have to find the co-creators or early adopters, or the other term that I used in the previous slide was innovators. Innovators and co-creators are roughly the same set of people who already have identified the pain point that you want to solve, and they're already doing something to solve it. So they are already hacking some solution on their own because they're tech savvy to solve that problem. Early adopters are users who have understood there's a pain point, but they're not doing anything to solve for it. Right? But you don't have to convince them that this problem needs to be solved. So that's roughly speaking the definition of these two terms. I will talk in more detail about these two in the next session. Right? And the third part, which is the objective way of validating, is to actually go and see if these users have the ability and the willingness to adopt your product. Right? Ability and willingness, slight difference. Ability is, do they have the capability? Right? So your product might be very, very good, and but the market or the users that you want to go after are not yet ready to adopt it. To give you an example, in 2014, when Vedantu launched its online education tuition class product, the internet penetration in India was not very, it was not very pervasive, right? And the internet speeds were low, right? So most people were accessing internet on their mobile devices. Most mobile devices were 2 or 2.5 G, and therefore you can't really do a 1 hour long session, right? So there's the ability itself does not exist at that point. Willingness to adopt is, you have the ability, but do you want to adopt it or not? That depends on, do you feel the pain point or not? How big is the pain point for you, right? So those are the two different terms, right? Which place is this? Sangam? No. Huh? Varanasi. Exactly. All right, so let's talk about this MUP, minimum unbundled product, a little bit. Right? I think the definition is clear. It's basically unpolished and incomplete product, right? And what you need to do is really look at whether people are, whether you are able to deliver that incremental value to the users, and that is that incremental value enough for them to adopt this product, right? So that's basically what it is. The important point here is that at this point, we are not trying to see if we can make money from this product, right? So that's why I'm differentiating this MUP from MVP, right? The V of MVP is viable. Viable is in the context of business model. So the MVP needs to help you as startup to validate the viability of the product you're building, that people are willing to pay for this product. MUP is removing that constraint, saying, essentially there are too many problems for a startup to solve. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to divide and conquer. We are saying, let's park the viable aspect of the product. We'll monetize it later. Let's first figure out, are people even do people even have large enough pain point for them to adopt a new product, right? So that's the only thing we are trying to solve here, right? So here's the second example. Anyone knows who were the early co-creators or innovators or the early customers who adopted WhatsApp? I mean, everyone uses WhatsApp now, right? So there's no doubt about that. Anyone has read about it or heard about it? No? So the first set of people the two founders, Jan and Brian. So Jan is from Ukraine. So what they did was they actually, and coming from that community, they knew that, I think just like Indians, the community is very tightly knit, right? And the people stay in touch with each other, right? So they knew that this community has figured out means to stay in touch with each other, or they're always calling each other, checking with each other how things are going with them. So that was that early adopter, actually pre-early adopter, innovator user set. Value model, any guesses? Was it performance, access, effort? Effort. Everyone is on effort? Okay, great. It was effort, and the reason it was effort was, again, there were other messaging products out there. And what WhatsApp did was let me make it very easy for people to stay in touch with each other. And that's what did. So Facebook existed, people could use that to message each other. But Facebook was public forum. So whatever you put there, everyone got to know. And these guys said, let's not every communication is worth sharing with the whole world. Let's keep these the conversations private, right? And that's basically what this, and let's make it as easy as possible for users, right? And I'll tell you how they did, what impact it had, the effort-led strategy had on their product itself, right? MUP for them was basically a simple app, right? Which was actually an app on top of the contact book, right? So what they thought initially was that, when, as a user, let's say you are in a gym or in a class, right? And someone's trying to reach you, someone close to you is trying to reach you, and you can't take the call, right? I think what happens in India, unfortunately, is people pick up the phone and, whisper saying, I'm in a call, I'm in a meeting, I will call you later. What they said was, that obviously interrupts the whole flow of the meeting or the class or whatever. There should be a indication in the phone book, right, which the user can change, which basically can say, I'm at gym, I'm in meeting, I'm doing something. So there are various codes, let's say, you can have, right? And you can set that, saying, therefore, I can't talk to you, right? So instead of picking up the phone and saying, I can't talk, you can actually indicate to them, I can't talk. So that's basically what they thought was a good idea. And, it was actually picking up slowly, but not that fast, right? But what happened is in 2007 or 8, or I think maybe 8 or 9, is when Apple for the first time, iOS for the first time, introduced push notifications, right? Which is basically, I think everyone has seen push notifications. When you're using an app, a pop-up comes which tells you something, right? So basically what they used. And what they did was actually whenever you, as a user, you change your status, it will broadcast to all your contacts. So essentially they were spamming everyone, right? But this community was more than happy to get this spam, right? Because these are people that you know very, very well. And if you're getting 15 messages from them saying, I'm eating lunch and I'm at a meeting and I'm in a gym, everyone's happy. But essentially that's what they did, right?
So they were sending notifications that you are at gym.
So if, as a user, you change your status, right, that status change will trigger a push notification on all your contacts.
But doesn't people get irritated with this because you don't like to see a lot of time?
If random people were to start sending you, you will be irritated. But if you are basically saying, here's my close group, and within that, if you're getting those messages, 10 times in a day, you're happy. I mean, you're not happy, but you're okay with that. So the point here is, this was an early version of the product. It was not the polished version of the product. It was just to check whether there is a need for this. Because if you remember, there was SMS already there, right? SMS was virtually free, right? There was Facebook already there. You could always message people on that. There was email, obviously. You could send larger messages by email. So there were many communication mechanisms available. You're building a new product, which you think is great, but you don't know if actually people will adopt it or not, right? So you're trying to validate, is it worth it or not worth it? And therefore, this spam was actually okay for that use at that stage of the company, right? Obviously, later they removed that. It's not like, we are getting those spam. Otherwise, no one will be using WhatsApp today, right? But at the early stage, this is perfectly fine to do these kind of things, right? That's the point here, right? So early products need not be or should not be polished and complete, right? You should get something out in the market, and you should see if there's a willingness to adopt that product, right? This makes sense for a software company. What about a hardware company? What about a deep tech company, right? We in the last session, we talked about how Tejas has become a large company, 2.5 billion or more valued at, right? It has a large product suite, across various aspects of telecom networks, right? The first product they launched was this, right? This is the first product they launched, and question is, how did they go about doing it, right? So what I'm trying to tell you is that everyone goes through this process of identifying user model, defining the value model, then validating the need for it, right? Now, the need is validated often by working with someone who is a co-creator, innovator, who is willing to work with you and willing to give you feedback about the products you're building, right? So in Tejas Network, what happened? Let's look at that. So first of all, user model. This is again a time where internet or wireless network or the mobile phones that we use today were getting adopted fast in India. Right? This is when the Tejas was started, 2000 or so. Right? So there were a bunch of telecom operators, all of them investing money into building networks. Airtel was the leader at that time. So Tejas reached out to Airtel as well as a number of government entities. It was BSNL, MTNL, which was in metros at that time, which then got merged into BSNL, and Railtel, which is basically railways communication arm, right? And so on, right? So basically they reached out to all the telecom operators. The value model for them was that we will give you a better product, right? And we talked about that Tejas had the performance-led strategy, right? They always wanted to build better products, better than first in world kind of a product, right? So what they did was they said most of the products built by Cisco, Nokia, others are hardware-based products, right? What they said was you should be able to configure the products in a software manner, right? So they were the first company to say we will build software-driven telecom products, right? So you can configure the capabilities of this router from remote, without having to physically touch it, right? So that's, I think now it's a common thing. Even Tesla car can get upgraded remotely. So at that time, this term was called OTT, right? Over the air transfer, OTA, over the air, correct. So that's what they did, and what they said was, if we do that, we can also reduce the cost. So that's also reduce the cost 30 to 40%, right? So there are a bunch of things, but primary strategy is performance strategy, right? But you can't just build this hardware product. It takes time and effort. So what they did was they went to two sets of people. One, they were funded or they were supported by Sycamore. Gururaj Deshpande, like I said, was the early investor and supporter of Tejas Networks. Right? Sycamore was a market leader, in the optical networking. So when the internet started booming, the whole world said, okay, the copper-based wire is not enough. We need to move to optical wires. And Sycamore was a leader in that, right? So that's basically, in the US, they were basically a large player at that time. And they had the expertise. So Tejas leaned on Sycamore to get some of those insights, how the world is moving and what kind of products they need to build, right? Second, like I said, since Tejas was in India and Indian telecom market was growing really fast, they went back to these operators and said, okay, what do you need? Because we are building some products. India has certain special requirements, like we have much higher temperatures, right? The power fluctuations and other things, so we need devices to consume less power, right? And of course, cost of ownership needs to be lower because the ARPU, what the telecom operators, the customers, which is us, what we can pay to them is much lower than what people in more developed countries can, right? So went to them, understood the requirements, and they built products for that. Right? So that's basically what got them to build this product, right? So essentially, as a company, you must figure out who your co-creators are, and you have to build products with them. And so that's basically what it is. Any questions? All good?
So for a hardware company,
yes.
Build some product,
yes.
they require some infrastructure, right?
Yes.
Initially to get the validation.
Correct.
How does Tejas got those infrastructure to create these optical multiplexes?
Yeah, so that's where the funding plays a role. So you need to have money, right? So effectively,
Does companies get help in the infrastructure part also, that okay, you can go in some other company and manufacture a product? Is there something like that?
you can, but you need to have the right, what's the right word? Relationships with them, right? So it could come from you yourself, or it can come from the mentors or advisors that you have, right? Or it could come from entities like ARTPARK, which have those relationships, so that you can do that. But effectively, you can. But in a lot of cases, there are ways to raise some money, which is grant money, right? Basically, to build those things. So, and again, the reason we're talking about MVP right now, the minimum unbundled product, is so that you need the least amount of money and least amount of time to build that product. right? So that's and that's why this one is a simple product, relatively speaking, what came later. So you want to start with a simple product so that you can actually, prove to yourself and to the world that there is a need for a product like this. Right now, we're only establishing there is a customer, a set of users who have a need for a product like this. Right? So the next example I will use is to show that sometimes these journeys are tough. Right? It's not always easy to actually validate that, because it looks like, okay, you've done user research, you've identified the gap, you have a co-creator, you build the product, hopefully things will pan out, right? Example where it actually takes a long time to do it, right? So Earth is a company which is basically was incubated at IIT Bombay, right? Within a thing called DSSE, Desai Sethi School of Entrepreneurship. Within that, a program called IDS program. So that's basically where they got 18 months of incubation. Ravi Kaushik is from, I think, Delhi, and his co-founder is from a small city in Bihar. Right? So those two guys, basically. The technology itself was developed in IIT Kanpur and ISC. Right? So the technology is from these two places. And the essential technology is basically a new kind of material which can be used to create air filters. Right? And it is basically, like it says, it can remove fine particulate matter and deactivate virus and bacteria. Right? So that's basically what the essential technology is, right? So once the technology was there, which was developed at ISC and IIT Kanpur, someone said, okay, why don't we use it to build filters, because air pollution is a problem in India, right? So at the start, they said, okay, let's build the air filters, and the question therefore becomes, what's the value model and user model? User model is basically retail users who are in high pollution cities, right? So likely not the cities in southern part of India, but in the northern Ganges plain, right? So that's and the value model was building a better air filter, right? A superior air filter. That's what they wanted to do. And that's what they did. They actually said, okay, it's actually straightforward. Once you have this new filter, you can always build this device. I don't know if people have seen it or opened it. Fairly simple. It has a fan and it has a filter. Sucks in air and lets the air pass through that, and so straightforward thing to do. One would think, right? So before I say the next part, any guesses from what we have seen from activity matrix and from value model? Value model is okay. It's a performance-led strategy. But from activity matrix, any intuition, what could be the problem or challenge with this kind of a product? Yes. Why would it be tough to sell such a product to customers? One answer is because it requires change of habit. Okay. Anyone else? Any other thought process?
Because it is concentrated only on a particular region of something used to be there.
Right. So it's basically the second possibility is it's focused only in the areas where the pollution is higher. But that's of 30-40% of India's population, which is 1.4 billion into 40% is more than $500 million. So large enough, hopefully. Affordability. So actually none of these. Sorry? The need should be felt by users. So affordability, need should be felt by users, number of users, and changing habits. So actually none of this, because if you look at the two dimensions of our activity matrix, one is the input and the other is the output, right? This is a B2C product. So the two dimensions are frequency of usage and importance of usage. The problem is on the frequency of usage, right? This product, as it says here, is needed only for a few months. So once the kharif crop starts, residue of that, the farmers start burning that, that's when the problem starts, right? Roughly October timeframe. And when they stop burning, roughly end of December or something like that, typically the problem goes away, right? So it's October, November, mid-December, right? It's like 2 months, maximum 3 months is what the need is, right? That's the problem, right? the importance is high during those 3 months, but the rest of the year, you really don't need. I mean, there's actually a case to be made that the pollution is high throughout the year. So you can actually or might want to use it throughout the year. But that's where the other part, secondary issues come in, changing habits, affordability, those kind of perception of the problem, because you can't see that the air is not good, right? So those are secondary, but the primary is actually it is not that frequent issue. And that's why they were struggling to sell. The other part they were struggling was to raise money from anyone was that it's a small market. I mean, you do calculation, all the filters being sold in India, and figure out it's a sub $200 million market. Right? The media will make you think that this is a huge problem. Actually, it is a huge problem, but it has not yet been recognized to be a large enough problem for people because the impact is not immediate. Right? So the Y dimension, the ROI in the user's mind of pollution, the impact of that is not immediate. It is over years. So you're not able to pinpoint, therefore you're not able to do it. Yeah.
Instead of portable ones,
yes.
Like, does the technology allow to scale it on these giant suckers which are?
Yes.
Then you can sell it to governments like municipalities or even
I think.
gated community you can install one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think it is a viable?
Something like this is going on in China.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually going on in Delhi also. They have installed the air purifiers in Connaught Place and other places, high density areas. I think the fundamental problem still doesn't get solved. The frequency of usage is low. Right? So unless there is unless you can tackle a problem which is needed on an everyday basis, this will remain an issue. So yes, what you're saying is the go-to market or the channel, you can pick different channels, distribution networks, and you might actually get higher penetration, but fundamentally it's still a problem, right? So that's.
Technology allowed it to become bigger, right? Like it is not that first line where you have described the technology.
Yes.
Like, is it only on a small scale?
No. There's no limitation of that on that. Yeah. So I think they have actually done a few pilots in Delhi also, where they have shown that it can be actually done in a larger scale. Right? Yeah.
In fact, is this product solving the real problem? Because if we go to say Delhi,
Okay.
we don't stay at home all the time.
Yes.
Half of the day, almost whole day we're outside.
Well, so
At the office or traveling.
So 3 areas where you spend most of your life. One is home, second is office, and third is traffic. Right? But all 3 can have air filters. I mean, most of the cars today are coming with air filters. They already have PMI 2.5. So exactly. So I think, let's say we solve all of them, right? I think that was his point also. Put it in offices also, therefore now you have 2 places, right? But the thing is still it's needed for those 3 months. At least, that's the perception, or that's at least the felt need, right? So that still remains the problem, right? Sorry?
We can integrate that.
Okay, wonderful, yeah. So you get the prize, which they took 5 years to crack. You cracked it now. But I think sometimes it helps to look back. So this is what actually the problem was. This is what they did actually. So I'll tell you what went about. So they did 63 lakh sale in 22-23, March and year ending March 23, 63, then 2.13 March 24, and by October 24, 2.2, right? So they were on an upward swing, but the swing really started happening in 2023. And the reason it happened was because they switched to this strategy. They said, high pollution, yes, but air conditioners are there in everyone's house, at least, in lots of houses, right? The need for AC plus the filter is, if you put them together, is much more frequent, right? You are therefore increasing the utilization of that asset or that product, right? That's basically what they went after, right? And in the process, they also increased the market size. So from 160 million to 4.4 billion, right? So that's what took them a few years to figure out, right? And
You can also integrate them in hot air doors, like.
once you that, so exactly. So what it does, this device is really, it doesn't need any electricity. is just a filter which sits on top of the AC, where AC is sucking in the air, right? It's sucking in from here and blowing it out from here, and it sits on the top, right? And therefore, whenever you switch on the AC, you will get better air. Right? A very simple device. It can be sold for, they sell it for lowest model 1,500, highest model 3,000 rupees. So at a fraction of cost of a AC, right? But actually a straightforward value proposition now, right? But took them a long time to figure out, right?
They went from the B2C to B2B, like they are now selling to.
No, they're still selling to B2C. This is still being sold as a standard. See, the thing is, and which is where the next question comes, okay, why can't an AC company do it, right? Why don't they integrate this thing inside, right? And then that'll kill their market, right? So the answer, having spent years, these guys have an answer for that, saying if you were to integrate this and make it an active filter, they'll add a 10,000 rupee or 12,000 rupee cost to the AC itself. Right? That's not going to work. No one's going to pay, that much, if typical AC, 1-ton AC is 1.5 lakh rupees or whatever, adding 10% of cost is too high for most people to actually, buy. So most people end up buying the one without a filter like this. So putting a one on top is actually more cost effective and most efficient, which is what they do, right? And using this, they basically appeared on Shark Tank in January, earlier, a month ago. They got around 1 crore at 4% equity. So the company was valued roughly at 25 crore rupees. And actually, more importantly, they got 20,000 more orders. So essentially, they doubled their sales in that, in that 1 month, since that they appeared, they have doubled their sales, right? Because if you roughly take 2,000 rupees into 2,000 rupees into 20,000, it's actually 4 crores. So actually, they have tripled their sales in that year, right? And the money they got was for two people who have built two successful D2C brands, right? So they're basically also hoping that they can leverage that expertise to sell directly. So they're not becoming a B2B company. The DNA of the company is still B2C, but it's actually now more frequent usage, right? And therefore, solves the problem and gets the value model to be more efficient for them, right? So finding the right users to sell to is actually very important. Sometimes non-trivial. Sometimes people like you can come up with in a minute, but companies take.
They died during those 4 to 5 years.
They didn't die?
Able to expand their
No, see, the startups that survive are very, very resourceful, which is why we're talking about them. So they incubated IT Bombay. IT Bombay gave them a little bit of money. Then they got incubated at, I think, IT Kanpur. So they actually figured out a way to survive. Right? And they were making money. It's not like they were not making money. They were selling. So it's even before that, they were selling. So, but they were not selling. They were not scaling as fast as they wanted to. Yeah.
Just can you elaborate why they, just from their mindset, what they might be thinking, why they are not going for B2B? Wouldn't that be much more lucrative? What they must be thinking?
Why are they not doing B2B? So if you want to do B2B, you have to sell to AC company. So you have to sell to OEM. What we have discussed is that the minute you are a supplier to someone else, your revenues will be 1/10 of what that company makes, right? So if we do that math, the 4.4 billion will become 1/10 of 4.4 billion maximum that you can make. Because no one component can charge more than 10%. In fact, it will be less than 10%, right? If you add, because AC has many components and you can't charge more than 10% of that, right? So maximum best case is 440 million, right? Air filter itself is 160 million, right? A thing which sits on top of AC likely is much bigger than 160 million. So I think they can actually reach as large a market and they can get valued better if they are B2C versus if they become B2B. Yeah. So you have to do a trade-off of how much your reach will increase versus how much will you lose in the process. And so that's the math you'll have to do roughly to decide whether you should be B2B or B2C. I'm not saying everyone should be B2C. I'm just saying that math needs to be done so that it's clear to you that it is, it's additive to you and not, doesn't hurt you in the process.
Isn't it, as you said, that we should see the trade-off between
Correct.
Doesn't that will help them initially to grow their market share and the number of customers they are?
I will talk about this next time. In the next session, I'll talk about it, because a lot of startups want to do distribution-related partnerships. We have to look at it from the lens of the distributor. What would they see in the startup to sign up? Because there is some cost involved with saying that, yes, I will sell a startup's product to the world, right? Which is, so the math should work for them also. How much investment they're doing in terms of training their salespeople and asking them to sell this product versus how much revenue they can make, right? So that math typically does not fall in favor of them partnering with startups. So we'll talk about that. Right? Go to market is an important thing. We'll talk about it next session. All right? All right, so which place is this? Huh? Sorry, Gaya. Bodh Gaya, it's related to Buddha, but not Bodh Gaya. Nalanda, no, Nalanda to Gaya. Nalanda to Gaya. This is the place where Buddha gave his first lecture, Sarnath. And so he walked from Bodh Gaya all the way to Varanasi to give his first lecture. You know, you have to ask, why did he do that, right? And I think there is obviously answer in history and in geography of India, but I'll not get there right now. Okay, so the question is, what is this co-creator, right? And I've referred to it a couple of times. Innovators for B2C companies and co-creators for B2B companies. Actually, no. Innovators for actually co-creators for deep tech companies or hardware companies, because you want to not build something unless there's a validation from a real customer right up front, right? So that's basically. And everyone else is an innovator. B2C software companies, all them can treat them as innovators. They just want an early version of product to get adopted, right? So that's the difference between the two terms, okay? So co-creators are people basically who are willing to work collaboratively with you and actively contribute to develop the product, right? So this is a figure which normally what you do is, as a company, you build product, you give it to your customer. The customers will then put in the analytical hat saying, is it serving all my needs or not, right? And then they'll give you feedback, right? So it's a feedback loop, but it's a feedback loop that's a long feedback loop. It takes longer time for you to get feedback from them. A collaborator, on the other hand, you can actually go talk to them without building the product, right? You can actually talk to them about the specs of the product itself. So that's a collaborator, right? So that's what we want to do. And what we don't want to do, and I think lots and lots of companies do that, startups do that, we don't want to acquire customers who want fully polished product. The reason a lot of companies fall in trap for that is because they are large companies and they tell startup that if you give me these features, I will give you this much money, right? So let's say you're building a product, right? And you want to sell it to, let's say to railways, right? And the railway says that if you build this robot which can help me avoid accidents, then I will buy it, but I need these long list of features, right? Now you as a startup are in a dilemma, because that long list of features is going to take you a couple of years to build, right? But at the same time, if you do crack railways as a customer, you know you'll become a large company, right? And that's where I think it is not non-trivial problem to be in, right? At that time, you have to decide or ask yourself, is this customer, so I'm using railways just as a, generic name, but really you have to ask yourself a question, is this customer a co-creator or not? Are they going to work with me in a collaborative manner or not, right? If yes, then work with them. If not, don't work with them, right? That's basically what it is. Now, this concept of co-creator is actually fairly common. People know what this product is. Anyone has played with this product? Legos, right? And I don't know if you know, but Legos has a very, very well-known co-creator program called Legos Ideas. So what they do is, they ask customers to give feedback about what kind of Lego sets that they should build, as a company they should build, right? And sometimes the feedback is very, very, common. Any guesses what's the inspiration for this Lego set? Huh? It's a Hollywood movie. It's a Hollywood movie called Jaws. Right? So that's basically anyone who has seen Jaws and has got impressed by Jaws wants to buy this product and do it at home. Sometimes these products are not that common, but they are kind of interesting. Right? This is a product, a Lego set, where you can actually build a bee wax, right? A beehive. Right? Some user gave it. If enough people give upvote to that idea, then Lego as a company builds that product, sells it in the market, and a percentage of that revenue is given to the innovator or the creator of that or the person who gave that idea. So that's a very common way that they do it. Question is, how can deep tech startups do this, right? And for that, I'll use this example, Grey Orange, a robotics company, one of the largest robotics company out of India. They were valued at 1.5 billion a year or 2 years back. 545 million is what they've raised so far. Right? Started by two guys, Akash and Samay, both from BITS Pilani. Right? And what they did was when they were out of college, they said they want to do a robotics startup. Right? And like we have discussed, they said, okay, where all can robotics be used? Right? And as a subset of that, and what they talk about is 3 areas they identified: oil and gas inspection, supply chain management, and railway track management, maintenance. Right? Those are 3 areas. First, they went after the oil and gas inspection. Right? Now, while they were doing that, they realized that this is not as clean or as straightforward as they thought originally. Clean and straightforward in the sense that to close the deals, it was not just based on the performance, there were other aspects to it which they didn't want to get into. Right? So they dropped it. Right? The next in their idea was, okay, if not, then let's do the supply chain management. Right? If they had failed on that, they would have gone to railway track maintenance. Right? So second thing, they were doing one thing at a time. They were not doing, let's do all 3, sab pe chipkate hain, jo chal gaya, we'll do it. No. They said, let's do it in a systematic way, which is actually what I also recommend. Please pick one use case, go after it, validate it. If it doesn't work, then go to the next one. Doing in parallel doesn't work. Right? So second, they picked supply chain management, which is around 2012, 2013. Right? And this is what they built, which is today. Right? These are the large set of robotics solutions which are applicable to supply chain management. Right? Question is, how did they actually do it? Right? How did they build? This is the first robot that they made for warehouses, and the question is, how did they go about doing it? Right? Because what we see today, you have to actually go back all the way to the time they started and understand what happened then, because that's what we need to understand for our early stage company, because that's what we can replicate or try to copy if we apply it to the a theory like user model, value model, business model, because random stories cannot be used for inspiration. We need to abstract out the essence of that, right? So here's the essence of it. So what they said was, supply chain management actually itself was growing. 2013, 2014 is when, I think 2013 or 14 was the first time Flipkart in the history of Indian startup ecosystem raised $100 million. First ever startup to raise that kind of money, from a VC. Right? So e-commerce was growing. Amazon had entered into India. So they basically were, Flipkart, Amazon, and Snapdeal were 3 large players at that time competing with each other. So what these guys did was they said, okay, let's understand what really supply chain management corresponds to. So they broke that down into fulfillment center. So when you put an order, when you place an order, it goes into the backend, right? And from there, it goes to a place called fulfillment center, where people are saying, here's a big warehouse. They pick the items you order, put in a package, right? From there, it goes to a sortation center, which is basically, let's say, a fulfillment center is outside Bangalore, let's say in Tumkur. From there, it will go to a sortation center where they will say, okay, these packages need to go to Bangalore, these need to go to Mysore, that needs to go to Hubli, and so on and so forth, right? So that's a sorting. They're just figuring out where different packages need to go. That's sortation center. Third is delivery station, which is when, let's say, the package comes to Bangalore, and within Bangalore, it'll come to different local hubs. So let's say it comes to the Belandur hub or HSR hub. From there, that's a delivery station. From there, they will someone will pick that package and take it to your home. right? So that's roughly how it works, right? So they picked only one of these, right? So this is what very important. You have, when you pick a use case, you have to pick a very, very narrow use case, right? And what they did was they focused only on sortation system, right? Any intuition why would they pick that? Why not the fulfillment center? Why not the delivery station?
Usually it's just for ease and value-added principles.
Ease and value added, no.
Easy for robots to sort the
Yeah.
products rather than label.
Sorry?
Automation is easier than
Automation, exactly. See, packaging, when you have to when you create packages, you have to pick these different items which have different shapes and forms and put them in packages. That's more sophisticated. Packages have been created, labels have been created. Now you need to read the label and put them in the right bin. Much simpler problem, right? So you want to always start with a simple problem. MUP should be very simple. You don't want to solve the tough problem at this point. You are right now validating, is there a need in the market? Can I sell this product to customer? So pick the simplest possible thing, which is what they did, right? And the great thing was at that time, because there was this intense fight between Flipkart, Snapdeal, and Amazon, Flipkart came up with this idea of saying, let's do a big billion-day sale. For the first time, they did that in 2014, right? And they were expecting large volumes for that, and for that, they wanted automation, right? Because they were spending lots of money, marketing money and all. They knew there will be a big spike, and they were giving lots of discounts. So they knew there was a spike. There were going to be a spike. And once you order a product at large discount, you want to get it fast. Otherwise, you think this company is not going to send me, because, I mean, now you won't worry about it. But 2014, first time ordering for the first time, a deal too good to be true, you are suspicious. Ki paisa to le liya, bheja nahi, right? You are always thinking that. So they wanted it to work fast, so that's what they did. This is what helped Grey Orange to scale from 4 to 40, 10x growth in that 1 year. Right? Of course, it also led Flipkart to say, oh, these guys can do this. We will put in some money in the company. Right? So sometimes your early adopters, actually co-creators, also become investors. Those are the better investors because they are aligned with what you want to do. Right? And then, of course, after the success, they were able to sign up Jabong, Delivery as customers, and then over time, basically they got all e-commerce and logistics companies. And then they went out of India and they went to global, to US. So that's basically it. So co-creator is very, very important. For them, it was Flipkart. Every startup needs to think who is a co-creator, who is aligned with their goals and who gives them, who works with them in a collaborative manner, helps them to build the right product. Right? So that's basically the bottom line. I think we have seen what this place is, so I will not ask. So let's get to the last part. All right. So the last part is basically to point out a few things which are related to these first two parts, which is MUP and the co-creator or initial customer. Those are two parts, right? And lots of people, I think, would know of this concept called bottom of the pyramid, fortune at the bottom of the pyramid. Book written by Prahlad, C.K. Prahlad, professor in Chicago Booth Business College. Very famous book. And I think it has inspired lots and lots of people, lots of startups actually to do, to look for gold at the bottom of the pyramid, right? What it means is you want to go after the users who are not served by anyone else, right? And there are many examples in the world. M-Pesa, I think, is the original inspiration. It was the largest thing before UPI came and, dramatically changed the world. But M-Pesa was the way in which people could transfer money amongst each other using their phones, right? So even if you didn't have bank account, you could transfer money between each other. So that was, M-Pesa is a Africa-based startup or initiative. Grameen Bank, I think most people have heard about Grameen Bank, right? They give small loans to people who were not, they were outside the purview of standard banks, right? Because they really needed 5,000 rupees, 10,000 rupee loan, and it is too expensive for large banks to serve those users for that small value. Right? And of course, these users also don't have the credit history or the kind of what is this called? The credit score for a bank to actually address them. Then there are companies like Sattva, which basically built a fetal monitoring device, right? So for pregnant women to basically monitor that the baby is fine, right? And that's a bunch of companies. All of them have succeeded, right? But, and I want to ask the but. Anyone can guess what's the but here? I mean, huh? No, they are all successful. M-Pesa are successful. All of them are successful, actually. So I'm actually picking failures. I'm not using. I'm right now giving you examples of successes.
The number of defaultees are a lot.
So actually, no. The reason actually is that most of these companies succeeded because they were supported by large companies. So when M-Pesa was started, it was started by Safaricom to say, I already have, 50 million or whatever, n number of customers, large number of customers. They're already using my telecom as service. Can I also give that additional service to them? Right? So that's a service, a layer on top of existing product. You look at Grameen Bank actually got a lot of support from the Bangladesh Central Bank. Right? And Sattva MedTech actually was supported by and also funded by Philips. Right? So the challenge with going after the early stage, bottom of the pyramid customers is that, there is, it's this dynamics between innovation and distribution, right, which we talked about. Startups have innovative products, large companies have distribution, right? To go to the bottom of the pyramid, you need essentially a distribution network, right? So that's basically where you have to look at that, right? So what I'm going to say is, don't do that. In startup world, one should never say never. So there are sufficient examples where you will find that companies have succeeded going out of bottom of the pyramid, but a large number of companies have not, right? And I'll use one example to give, to tell you why this is so tough, right? And why typically you should not do it, right? Typically, you might have a scenario where it makes sense and you should do it, but typically it's tough to do it, right? So here's a company called Simpa Networks. This is solar as a service startup, right? So they basically essentially had this solar panel, right, which can be used to generate electricity, and it was basically used to let the people in the rural India to get electricity. Right? This time frame is 2009 or something, 2007, 2009, that kind of time frame. Basically before the electrification of India happened, and now I think the penetration rate is much higher, but look back 15 years, a lot of India didn't have electricity. Right? So what they said was, okay, what we should really do is have a portable solar home system, which can help people who are not yet on the grid to get electricity, right? A noble cause, I think a good cause. And what they said was that this asset, should be eventually the person who has it should own it fully, right? So they came up with a model which is a lease to own, right? To basically reduce the capex upfront cost of that. They said, okay, you can pay some initial installment, and then you can pay per use. After a certain number of usage, the product becomes yours. You don't have to pay, right? So that's basically the model they had. Right? And not surprising, great product, actually works, got lots of awards. Not just awards, got lots of money. Right? Lots of VCs actually supported it. So I think raised around, $15 million? Actually, I'm not sure exact number, but raised reasonable amount of money. Right? But it didn't work. Right? It didn't work because, number one, the users are distributed across rural India. So you have to actually go sign them up. Right? You need to basically, so the cost of acquisition of those users is high. If the panel does not work or something goes wrong, you have to go and service them. That adds to the cost, right, from a startup point of view. Third point, I think you can guess that, because these are low income people, oftentimes they default in payments, right? So if I don't have money, I'm okay to switch off the electricity and not have electricity, right? Because my food and other requirements come first, right? So that's basically, so a lot of people defaulted, right? And also this hardware itself has a relatively larger capex, right? If there are companies which actually succeeded in this, especially a African company called Delight, very, very successful company, same idea. They had a much lesser capex and opex, right? So that's basically the reason why this didn't work. But bottom line is you have to look at your user model very carefully. On paper, sometimes things look very good. From what you want to do for the world, I think it looks very, very good. I think that's what gets you the awards and all that. But you have to also understand what is the details of that user model, right? Can you actually acquire them? Can you actually service them? Can you actually make money from them? That's what we need to eventually look at, because at the end of the day, if you're successful, if this company had found a successful model, later they could have gone back and served these users, right? So that's how. So first, find people who are ready to adopt your product, make a business, then get into the social aspects of business if you want to do that, right? But surviving and succeeding on self-sufficiency is very, very important. Yeah.
Like for social utilities companies,
Yeah.
it makes sense to make government as a anchor customer. Then
Wonderful. Next. Exactly where I'm going next. Yeah. But any other question on that before we go to government as a customer? Go ahead. Hey, can you check online also if there are any questions? Online if there are any questions. Okay. Okay.
Just an observation, like we are taking a lot of different companies.
Yes.
With very different background.
Yes.
And you understand those development very well, so you can speak about that very quickly and possible. I find it difficult to connect from one company to another.
Sure.
Good if we can have some case studies.
Yeah.
Say 1 hour.
Which is why your assignments are about case studies. And then next part is, you will do your own startup. So it will be an even deeper case study. No, I agree. See, these things are not non-trivial, and it takes years for people to figure out. So I am fully with you.
Like
But
your wisdom will come out.
no, there's no, see, the only reason I know about this is because with some companies I have worked myself and I have seen their journeys, right? Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to, glean these things, ki, ye chalega, wo nahi chalega, right? So the thing is that you have to take out that and abstract away the details of their individual scenarios and say what was really happening at the core of it, right? And that's basically what we are trying to do. We're saying at the core of it, the user model is important. The user model depends on input and output parameters. Frequency of usage is important in B2C product, which is why Earth basically struggled, right? Look at this particular example. The frequency of usage is high, right? It's on the importance dimension, right? In the importance dimension, it is obviously not helping the users to generate more money, right? It is on the cost side. So as a user, I'm thinking, okay, I'm paying for this, right? Obviously, I'm getting some utility out of that, right? But I have to put this on the various other things that take my money. I have to do that relative thing. So if my core needs are more important, then I will cut down on this, and which is why the defaults happen. So what I'm suggesting is using that lens, a quantitative lens, is actually much better way of understanding who users are and whether you're likely to succeed or not succeed. So the stories are to actually reinforce that point rather than to give you random stories, right? They're all reiterating the same point, that look at user model, look at it from a quantitative parameter, input, output, depending on B2C or B2B, figure the right parameters and then look at them in depth.
So you're giving a very right example.
Hmm.
We are finding it difficult to connect. So I'm just suggesting that in one session we can have 2 case studies where everything that we have discussed we can connect very easily.
Understood. Great. We'll do that. I think maybe out of the 4 or 5 case studies you guys are doing, we'll talk about them or present them, and others can comment on that. So we'll figure out a way. Good suggestion. Any other questions?
So first point related to cost.
Yeah.
Second point also related to the cost and ability to pay.
Okay. Here.
Right side, they have sufficient funding to revise these things around. Why they couldn't do it?
No, this funding is not sufficient. It's 5, 7, 11, 20, 13, 14, $25 million. No.
We are talking about Indian market.
look at Flipkart, how much did they had to spend to change the user behavior? The reason they raised a few $1 billion because you need that much to change behavior. Right? The reason Paytm spent $5+ billion to get us to, do mobile payment is because of that. Swiggy, I think it takes much, much more than this to, yeah. So, all right. Okay, so the question was, why not government as a customer, special for these kind of things? And I think government as a customer has a success story, right? IdeaForge, company which went IPO, I think 2023, June 2023. So we have to again go back and see how they started and what did they do initially, right? So first set of users, user model, value model, interestingly, was very different from what they eventually became, right? And which is actually also very common for startups. So it's perfectly fine to start somewhere and end somewhere else. So first one was, again, 2007-8, electricity, not very deep, penetration in India. Very less people have that. So they said, okay, mobile phone is becoming important. You need something to charge this mobile phone, right? Because if it's out of charge, you can't use it. So they said, let's have a hand cranking machine so that you can charge mobile phones. So that's what they did. It was clearly an access-less strategy. It was basically to say people who don't have it, let's make sure that they have access to a charger, because your normal charger doesn't work when there's no electricity. So I need a backup charger, right? That's what they did, right? It can be called a clean energy or sustainable energy or whatever, company, whatever. You can put whatever dabba you want to put them in. 2008, end of 2008 is when the Mumbai 26/11 attack happened. And these guys said, okay, we got to do something, right? We got to do something about this, right? And also at that time they were, at IT Bombay. These are IT Bombay. The 4 founders are all IT Bombay. They were actually participating. They were part of the robotics club, and they were building this. Actually, they built India's first autonomous drone. And what they did was they actually came up with the world's lightest and smallest autopilot, right? And that's what they used to build this first autonomous UAV called Carbon, right? So that's how they started. This is their MUP, right? Which gave them a sense that actually we can do something good for India, and we can actually do something, where you can help. Right? The co-creator for IdeaForge was Government of India. The co-creator was DRDO. DRDO, after they saw this, they got excited, saying, oh wow, there's a technology in India that's getting developed for which we have desperate need. So they reached out to IdeaForge team and they gave them the specs for border surveillance drone. And say, if you build this, we will buy it. Right? That's what a co-creator does. It says that. It doesn't say that if you build it, I'll think about it. It says that if you hit these specs, I'm going to buy it. Right? At times, it also gives you the money, saying, okay, you might not have money, take the money from me. And that's what a co-creator should do. And that's also proof that they have a real pain point. If they say build it and come to me, then we'll discuss, that means the pain point is not yet there. They're still evaluating whether they really want your product or not. Right? In this case, obviously they gave the money, and famously, or we know that IdeaForge succeeded and they built it, and it's one of the largest drones company in India now. Right? So it's obviously now used for more than border surveillance. It's used for disaster management. It's used for various other scenarios also. Right. It did IPO at around 430 million, but the first day it actually almost doubled. So the actual listing price first day was 800 million or more. Right. The interesting thing is, at that time, 70% of revenue was coming from defense forces. This is 2013, and now actually the numbers have gone up. They're now making 77% from Government of India. So government as an early adopter, government as a co-creator, yes, maybe, not always. Right? I'll give you one more example, because what has happened in the last 10 years, and it's really a change that has happened in the last, 10 years or less, is that government actually has become very, very open to procuring products from Indian startups. Earlier, there was this nonsense about RFP. And RFP used to have this criteria which only large companies could meet. Right? And I have participated in some RFPs for telecom companies. Because when I was doing my startup, and those requirements were written by the McKinseys of the world, and only large companies would be able to satisfy it, right? They had the turnover requirement and profitability requirement, which startups don't have, and therefore they were always excluded, right? There's a dramatic change that has happened in the last few years, right? Here's an example. IDEX is the Innovation for Defense Excellence, right? They actually put out challenges. They actually put out specs saying this is what we want. If people are able to meet it, they actually procure it. As simple as that, right? They give you money also for that. So there's a grant money also. So if you participate and you get shortlisted, you get a grant money as well to build it. Here's a company which is actually associated or supported by ARTPARK. It's called Astrom. They were the ones who basically built the GigaMesh and GigaSat, basically telecom capabilities. And I think on the basis of this, recently they raised $10 million. Right? So government as a customer, co-creator, again, another example of yes. On success of this, Government of India started another program for space startups, which is called InSpace, right? Another 500 crore has been allocated towards, over the 5 years, but that's the thing. The original one in this is a company called, or a department called BIRAC, or a program called BIRAC, which is run under Department of Biotechnology, right? Which basically supports a number of bio-related areas, biosimilars, agriculture, devices, drugs, so on and so forth, right? The thing is to keep looking out for these challenges that they put out, right? So here's an example of, agri startups, and certain requirements will be there. So you look out for them. If you find them, you can apply, you will get a grant. BIRAC has a very nice gradual way of, getting more and more money. They fund these startups, right? And you can actually start, you can use that money to build the early versions of your product, right? So that's basically what yeah. Is that okay? So government as a co-creator, I think yes. It's becoming feasible now. And what I will do is in the next session to give you the other side of the story, which is the investor side of the story, right? But for the time being, we'll basically stick to this. So the challenge happens, you have a large company as your co-creator, and they start thinking of you as a service provider, right? They know that you're a small company. They know they're a big company, right? And they know that you can't run away from your contract, because especially if they're paying you, right? Then I think the question is, so what should you do, right? So here are a few suggestions, and I think every startup will have to figure out its own thing. But basically, you'll have to somehow navigate your way through that requirements that they put to make sure that you're building your product as per your vision. And you're using that feedback they're giving to improve your product, which is not a custom build for them, but a general value addition for everyone, right? So that's basically bottom line here, right? So, and also to avoid it, upfront, you need to have two things. You need to have a good clarity of what kind of company are you building, the DNA of the company, and what is the value, the strategy that you're applying or using, performance-led, effort-led, or access-led. So that clarity and what kind of product you want to build, is very, very important. Second is to actually be very, very careful in picking a co-creator, because even if you're able to navigate, it creates too much of pain and issues for the company, and a lot of money gets spent, or money as in time gets spent. So here's an example of how you can do it successfully. SpaceX, everyone knows SpaceX, but I didn't know this, that a lot of money actually was invested by NASA itself. Right? I found this out recently, that of course, it got initial money from Elon Musk, but NASA has been actually supporting it and funding it. 2002 is when they started. 2006, first launch they did, failed. 2008 is the first launch, right? So it's a 6-year period in which you're really getting questioned by everyone saying, what are you doing? Is it going to work or not? Exactly what happened with them also. So NASA was pushing them saying, what is this? Why do you want to do this, right? In fact, they were actually said that these reusable rockets that you're talking about are not going to be reliable. Right? So they were actually pushing them very strongly to actually go back and use the classic design of it. But SpaceX was very clear that reusable rockets is the only way to reduce cost. And I think I should thank Ruben for this. He's the one who pointed out that actually SpaceX's initial story was all about reducing cost, right? And basically, but the larger story, the reason they were so clear what they want to do was at least they say that humanity should become intergalactic species. For it to become intergalactic species, it must have a satellite or a colony on Mars. For it to have a colony on Mars, the cost of travel has to come down, right? And of course, you have to reach Mars also. So it's performance also. So actually it was performance, but for the co-creator, it was cost, right? In any case, so Grasshopper, the first prototype that they had, they worked on it, iterated many times, eventually proved that it can go up and come down, and that's what helps it to reduce cost. NASA obviously had their own ideas about, they've been doing it for, from 1969, actually a few years before that, till that time. So they had their own things. So in terms of, if there's a crew, what should the crew be able to do, was also, NASA had guidelines for that. They wanted a full manual control. And, SpaceX said, no, that's not the right way to do it. I think same thought process in Tesla also, FSD. What is FSD? Free self-driven? Full self-drive. So it should be self-driven, but there should be manual override, right? Same thought process here. In fact, from here it came to Tesla. So, all right, so this is it. That's today's session. I will just, last slide, I'll just reiterate few points that we have discussed. So number one, at this point, at the user model validation phase, what you're trying to do is to validate the problem. You're not at all looking at the solution. You should not look at the solution. Only look at, is this problem worth solving or not? Right? If you're able to answer that, then I think you have already got yourself off to a great start. Right? But to do that, you have to actually go and build the product. Once you build the product, you go take it to your early customers, co-creators or innovators. What it will do is it will give you deeper insights about the users and markets. Because what they tell you versus when they start using your product and you have qualitative and quantitative data, right? What the feedback they give you and how well they're using it is what actually helps you to understand really what the needs are. Right? Other thing it does is, when you start asking them for money, it helps you to understand who has the ability to pay and how does the money flow in your category. So very important. In abstract, you can have these discussions, but actually really it shapes when you actually have a small product out in the market and people are willing to use it. Right? So final thing. So this is what is, I think, quite well known now. Fall in love with the problem, not the problem. Not just, I will cut the just out, not your solution. Right? And in fact, it's so well known that there's a person who's written a full book on it, a guy who's done 2 successful startups, $2 billion startups. Last one I think is called Waze, which was acquired by Google, which gives you directions. Essentially talks about exactly what I have talked about, right? But how do you find this out? What are you doing? And here's a quick test for yourself. So when you talk about your startup, when you talk about your idea, if you start with the first, so the problem-centric story would be, this is the problem we solve, right? So you're anchoring your story on the problem, or you're saying we help these users in this way, right? This is my user model, this is my value model. Then you're a problem-centric. A lot of people, on the other hand, do the second thing, which is we are doing this, or our product does this, right? That the minute, you can observe yourself and you can observe how you explain your story to the world. If you're on the second one, there's a need to go back to the beginning of this lecture session and re-listen to it, because that's when you really need to listen and actually implement some of the things, right? So it's a quick test for you to check. Ideally, you don't want to be doing that. I think a lot of researchers do that. People who have spent years doing research, they are very, very centered on this, because research environment forces you to think like that. Right? But when you are switching from a research to commercializing that innovation, you have to flip your lens and you have to go outside in, right? And you have to become problem-centric. Right? Okay, that's it. Any questions? Any last comments? Yeah.
I just had a couple of things across here.
Okay.
One was on the air purifier market.
Yes.
While it's good that it's not a real problem and all those things because of reason, but if you look at the market size itself, if you just Google right now on the last numbers from that
Mm-hmm.
research, they say the global air purification market is about
1.5 billion.
billion.
Okay.
And that of fans is about 12 or 15 billion.
Million.
Billion.
Billion. Okay. 12 billion fans and purifiers 1.5 billion. Okay.
Dollar billion.
Okay. Yeah. Got it.
So maybe that itself is the problem. Like that's why ARTPARK is successful while the case study that you gave where they're struggling because they picked a small problem.
No. So so there are two lenses, right? One is a market size lens, which is I think what you're applying. The other lens is the frequency of usage. The fans are switched on even now. We have not switched on any air purifier here, right? If it's summertime, I mean, in Bangalore we don't have ACs, but most cities will have ACs, so ACs will be switched on. So it's the frequency of usage. So if you anchor your product on that highly frequent product, you will actually likely succeed. This guy, famously, so when Waze was getting acquired by Google, I think Larry Page, the founder of Google, actually told Levine that we as in Google look for problems which are toothbrush problems, which is that you use it twice in a day, at least, or hopefully, depending on. Don't ask people; they will say twice a day, but they might not do twice a day. That's a say-do gap, right? You want to do twice a day, but you don't do. But anyway, so I think the comment that he made, Larry Page made to Yuri was, we look for problems which are toothbrush problems, which are twice a day, right? Which is what actually he talks in the book also, right? Which is what I have given you in a quantitative way, right? Saying there's a reason for that. There's a reason is there's an input and output, and you need to look at both of them. Right? So that was one comment. Anything you said? There were a couple of things. Yeah.
Bottom of pyramid thing.
Yes.
While originally when Prahlad wrote the book, he was trying to attract these Western multinational companies like Unilever to
Correct.
see that as a bigger opportunity.
Correct.
But the examples on the right side that you see, many of those things are actually not only startups, but for example, that Satcor MedTech is Philips.
Yes.
Philips annual opportunity for Philips to write in their annual report showing all these great things.
Yes. Yeah, the problem is that, exactly that. So when Prahlad wrote this, he wrote it from a different lens. What happens, and that is actually, unfortunately, that's what I've realized in the last 20 years. A lot of the gyan that gets given to startups is all been gyan or research done in the context of larger companies, in corporates. Right? Why is that? Because corporates pay you. So researchers get paid by corporates. Right? So a lot of their work gets done in the context of corporates. So it's true for Prahlad's work, it's true for Clayton Christensen's work. If you read his book about disruptive innovation tech, it is all about Intel. This is how Intel disrupted this. This is how a steel plant, which was a large steel plant, became micro steel plants. It is all corporates. But the problem is, we take that, not we as in we, but the what's the right word? The thought leaders or whatever you want to call them, of the startup ecosystem take that and they impose it on startups. Right? They say disruptive innovation technology is the only way to do startups. Right? And therefore everyone starts thinking, okay, how can I cut cost? How can I become better than someone else over time? And I think they also force fit things. They force fit even Apple iPhone into that model, clearly where it doesn't fit. Same thing is true here. It does not apply to startups, but it gets applied to startups. I mean, I can bet a lot of people in this room would want to do bottom of the pyramid, would want to say, people in rural areas, in tier 3, 4 cities are not getting served, I'll build product for them. Right? My point to them is, it is tough. It is easy for entities that have distribution networks, like HULs of the world, who can then make more money from them. It is tough for a startup to do it. Please look at the user model, value model, business model carefully before you jump in. Right? So that's the point.
I think it's not important whether we wish to do it or not. It's important whether we can do it or not.
Exactly.
More important.
Correct. Yeah. And you see, the thing is, the real answer whether you can do it or not do it is business model. Can you make money? Can you make profits? The point is that you should not have to wait that long, because that's a 3-5 year journey before you figure out. How can you get in the first year a signal saying, is it likely to work or not work? Right? Which is where a user model validation becomes important. So whatever idea you have, build a MUP, a small initial version of the product, take it to that co-creator or innovator, see if they're adopting it. If yes, you are on a good path. If you're struggling there itself, I think it's better to take a step back and pick a different problem to solve. Right? Fall in love with the problem, not the solution, means you should be able to flip your problems also. So you should be able to say, oh, this is not the problem which is worth solving. I'll solve some other problem. Right? So before you invest too much, you have to pivot. Unfortunately, pivoting also in startup literature happens way later. Right? And they are actually celebrated how Slack was building mobile games and they were failing, but then they realized that this internal tool they had built for communication, that was very highly used, so they launched it and everyone used it. My question would be, why did you have to wait that long? When you had no money and you were really against the wall, you should have figured that out much earlier. I mean, nothing to take away from Slack, very, very good product and successful company, but ideally you should be able to get those signals a little earlier and do, pivot sooner rather than later. Yeah.
The government as a co-creator,
Yeah.
it is not a question per se, but it is just in many of these sectors, you have when government itself is a player.
Yes.
Through its PSUs or through its departments.
Correct.
Even DRDO example, there are labs of DRDO who are making drones.
Correct.
Right. So
Yes.
now in a country like India, things are not codified.
Yes.
NASA could do to SpaceX because it is said in US law that NASA will stop being in areas where commercial capability exists. So how do you navigate this? Especially in markets where government is the actual customer. Space, defense.
Yeah, which is what I said in the next session. I will talk about that, because there are some risks of government also, right? And I think the risk, we'll talk about the risk. But I think the quick answer to that is, you have to look at the signs that government has already accepted that they will work with private entities. Right? You can't change the behavior of your customers, which could be end users or it could be government. Right? So if the government is already inclined to buy from large entities, after a large tender, it's tough for you to. No, policy is not fickle. See, actually, so let's go back. Why is US so successful? Right? It's not that NASA is that unique scenario. There is a program called SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, I think, and STTR, which is a transfer. Right? So there is a codified mechanism in US government which is saying the large entities, government entities, must collaborate with startups, and which is what actually drives the engine of US economy. I think government of India has also started going down on that path in the last 10 years. The 3 examples we have are examples of it becoming the codification is now happening, right? From defense to space to biotechnology, which are actually the 3 largest, spend areas. So I think we are going in that direction. Obviously, more needs to be done, but I think you need to, as a startup, you need to just make sure that you know where things stand today. InSpace got launched October 2024. So clearly it's not yet well defined, but we have examples of Agnikul already working with ISRO, Bellatrix. There are actually 10 odd companies which are actually successful. So I think it's one, as a startup founder, you have to understand where the market is. Right, so. But there are risks of working with government. We'll talk about in next session. Right. All right, and that's it. Thank you very much.